Dear ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the unusual format of a discussion within the framework of Energy Club. This is one of the previews of the future large-scale forum to be held in Vienna, Austria on the 9th of October this year. It will be called Balancing Europe's Energy System, Challenges, Solutions and Prospects. And it's about the conditions in which the energy transition in Europe found itself. This is going to be not a theoretical conference, but a closed strategic meeting for 100 key players on the market with a view to look for practical solutions in order to build a resilient and stable energy system of the future. Of course, Ukraine, which went through harsh tests, harsh circumstances, and still undergoing them, is a country that can play a crucial role in our common preparedness for the challenges that we face ahead. There will be several key panels during that forum on the 9th of October in Vienna. One of them will be today's challenges, technical and regulatory barriers for balancing. The second, the future of flexibility, best markets, demand response, and integration of customers. And of course, we will have some very authoritative and well-known speakers, including Viktor Kamyshev, who is the Director on Strategy and Growth Chief Officer of GE Vernova. He will present the view of one of the global technological leaders as they view the future of energy production. And he will speak during the digitalization and optimization, the role of AI and new IT platforms in our industry. Today we have an outstanding speaker as well, the person who actually oversaw the overcoming of difficulties that Ukraine saw during the initial stage of the large-scale Russian invasion back in 2022, and then successfully steered a lot of our industry despite constant attacks and despite all the damage that Russia inflicted through those tumultuous years. He is Volodymyr Kudrytsky, who until recently was the chief officer of Ukrenergo national company, and he will present you an overview of what happened in Ukraine energy-wise during those years, at least in 2022-2024, when he headed the Ukrenergo company. And I believe that he's one of the persons who is well in place to make some forecasts. After this, you will have an opportunity to ask Mr. Kudrytsky any question that you deem is connected to our today's topic. So I give the floor to Mr. Volodymyr Kudrytsky.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kulikov, and I'm honored to speak today. First of all, I would like to say that energy system is very much alike the economic system of the state. It has a very strong inertia. It is large scale. It is very basic for the normal life for millions of people, essentially all of Ukrainians. And of course, the invasion which happened on 24 24th of February 2022 caused huge changes to that, huge impact to that system. And we faced absolutely unbelievable challenges, which we did not even expect that we once would have faced. First of all, I need to tell you that since 2017, Ukrenergo team was preparing Ukrainian power system to be disconnected from Russia and to connect it to the power system of European Union. And that process was about to be finalized in 2022. And we were preparing ourselves in the night of the invasion, we were preparing ourselves for disconnection from Russia and Belarus. And we did it 3 hours before the full-scale invasion started. So we were disconnecting line by line. We started on February 23rd. And we finished this process of disconnection on 1:32 a.m. on February 24th. And we started to operate in so-called isolated mode. This was meant to be a 3-day test to demonstrate to Europeans that our power system was sustainable and stable. So we were meant to be connected back to Russia after that. But 3 hours later, the full-scale invasion started. And we were in the quite vulnerable position at the time, because our this isolated mode is something which is quite challenging for the power system, and not every power system in Europe is essentially able to perform in such a mode without any support from the neighbors, electric support, I mean. And immediately we decided that we would not come back to Russian system, obviously, and we had to speed up the process of interconnection between Ukrainian and European power system. And instead of 1 year, we did it in 3 weeks. So on 16th of March 2022, we already connected Ukraine to European power grid, which was a historical event for Ukrainian electric system, but also for Ukraine, I think as well, because in electric world, connection of this kind is very much like we would connect Ukraine to EU in the normal world. So basically, it was very important and complex step. And of course, in the first days and weeks of the invasion, we've lost around 30% of consumption in the country because of occupation of southern regions and many eastern regions, which was, as you probably remember, quite fast. And again, in the real world, it is equivalent of losing 30% of GDP instantly. So it was an unimaginable challenge for the power system. Also, in the beginning of March, Russians occupied Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, and it was a very dangerous event because it could potentially cause very large problems to Ukrainian system, because around 20% of the output, generation output of the system, was provided at that time by Zaporizhzhia. But we managed to tackle with that challenge as well. And when the situation on the front line was stabilized and Ukrainian forces has regained territory near Kiev, Sumy, Chernihiv, and very large part of the Kharkiv, they regained control over Kherson. The adversary started systemic missile and drone campaign against Ukrainian electric grid. Their strategic task was to fully shut down Ukrainian power system for weeks during winter, which would cause total collapse of the country. And because Russia was not able to break through the front line, Russia was not able to win the war on the front line. They were trying to create collapse for the civilians in Ukraine and win the war in that manner. So basically, they wanted to paralyze the country by paralyzing its electric system. Since then, Ukrainian electric system had to sustain more than 1,000 strikes of all kinds of missiles, cruise, ballistic missiles, hypersonic missiles, and many thousands of strikes of Shahid kamikaze drones. Ukrainian power system has lost more than 50% of the available generation, and this was the biggest campaign against electric system that humanity has ever seen. In 2022-2023, during winter, as you probably remember, we experienced quite massive power disconnections in the country because of deficit of power due to these strikes. This was also the case sometime in some periods of 2023. But in the end of the day, Russians failed to achieve their strategic task. So they managed to create this power shortages, but they did not manage to break down the power system. So power system operated as it was possible, and there was only one blackout situation in Ukraine during all these attacks. It was November 2022. But our dispatching center was able to recover from that blackout situation within 13 hours, which was much faster than average European restoration time, even without missile and kamikaze drone strikes. So since then, we had to replace almost every auto transformer in our electric transmission grid. Just for you to understand the scale, we replaced auto transformers of capacity, which is 2 times bigger than consumption of the whole country in only 1.5 years. So we basically probably we collected auto transformers from all around the world, from different continents, different countries. And in terms of auto transformers, for example, in this 1.5 years, we managed to almost fully reshuffle the whole transmission system. Uh, it took like 4 decades during Soviet Union times to build it, and we had to rebuild it in 1.5 years. And by this time, I can tell you that almost the whole capacity of auto transformers in electric grid has been restored, and also, which is very important, protected with concrete shelters, which we also designed together with the Ukrainian military forces. And this is also a unique experience, how to not only restore but also protect electric assets. And we are now sharing this. Ukraine now shares this experience with many countries, including United States, Israel, Europe, Scandinavian countries, Baltic states. And therefore, Ukraine found itself, and Ukrainian electric system found itself quite suddenly in the front line of the innovations, especially if we talk about safety and security innovations in electric world. So since then, Ukrenergo has gained 2 awards from Edison Electric Institute. This is the analog of Oscar in electric world, and also it's an American electric institute. And now Ukraine has not experienced power cuts, I think, for already 8 or 9 months since last year, and we have quite a good chances to avoid such power cuts in the upcoming winter due to the fact that Ukrainian electricians and energy workers have restored quite substantial amount of generation and transmission assets since then. So basically, there are 3 main ingredients to that restoration and to that resilience that Ukrainian power system has demonstrated. First, this is people. We had enough trained personnel at hand to restore electric objects very quickly, 3-4 times quicker than our European colleagues. This is number one. Number two, it was Western support. We received billions of euros of assistance in form of grants and loans from different organizations around the world, IFIs, uh, governments, banks, many different organizations from the Western world to restore our power grid. And third, it is, of course, strengthening of our air defense system. Air defense is 90% of protection which can be provided to electric grid, and only 10% can be provided by engineering protection. So air defense is absolutely crucial. And the moment when we started winning this uh, electric war against Russia was the moment when Ukraine started receiving Patriots, SAMTs, IRIS-Ts, and other air defense systems, which became crucial for the survival of the country and of its electric system. So these three ingredients are extremely important, and of course, now this experience of Ukraine has to be um, applied to those countries, especially those countries in Europe which are bordering to Russia, for them to learn from our lessons, and also to be prepared for any possible forms of aggression that Russia may reveal in the upcoming years. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kudrytsky, and I remind our listeners and viewers that there will be a even deeper talk about this and deeper discussion on the 9th of October in Vienna in the forum that the Energy Club is convening there. While I was listening to Mr. Kudrytsky as if relieved those months back in 2022 and remembered that my personal record of living without electricity in the electric world was 76 hours. It seemed that we are in for much worse, but then the work of Ukrainian industry, energy sector, and of the help of our Western, and not only Western partners, which Mr. Kudrytsky mentioned, helped us to avoid the dire consequences, although the situation is still very much serious. Of course, what I know and what I experience is a consumer experience on the personal level. And Mr. Kudrytsky is one of the top specialists in this. So I will be asking some very specialized questions in order to get a broader picture, which will be aimed to explain some of the methods and ways in which the Ukrainian industry has coped and is coping with the challenges. So, about the balancing during wartime, how do you operationally manage an energy system when any element can become a target? What protocols, what approaches have proven most effective?
Well, first of all, I need to say that we had to almost completely reinvent dispatching function during the full-scale invasion. 2 weeks before the invasion, we have secretly created a reserve dispatching location from where we could safely operate Ukrainian power system, and it was not known to the enemy, and we could safely move our dispatchers there, because dispatchers, in terms of balancing of the system, are the main guys. They're like main actors, and everything depends on their on their work and decision making. If not everything, then maybe 80% of the stability in the system. So first of all, we had to secure dispatching location. We did it, and when the full-scale invasion started, 2 days afterwards, we already operated the whole power system from the distant location, not from Kiev, because at that time it was not clear whether Russian sabotage groups or even Russian military groups would be able or not able to be somewhere near the city, near the office of Ukrenergo. Second thing is, of course, we had to uh, change drastically the reaction and preparation protocols. We have invented a special procedure together with some parts of Ukrainian military and special forces, uh, according to which, when Russians started their missile attacks, we applied certain procedures in the system, like disconnection of some customers and also a decrease of generation on some generation plants, including nuclear power plants, to make sure that if Russians hit any point in the electric system would not be split into parts and would not collapse. So, because Ukrainian western and eastern parts are not perfectly balanced in terms of consumption and generation, because we have more generation on the west, more consumption in the east. So we had to create, so to say, level a level field in terms of electric system in the moment when we were hit by Russian missiles, to make sure that even if Russians would manage to disconnect some power plant in the east, for example, it would not cause an uncontrollable chain reaction in the electric system, so it would not collapse. And this procedure was absolutely unique and invented during this full-scale invasion. I think that Spain, for instance, could avoid some quite negative consequences of the instability which led to blackout if they applied some precautions that we already invented in Ukraine. And of course, we had to reinvent physical restoration of the assets. We have deployed more than 1,000 people specifically dedicated to restoration of the substations, which are main nodes to transport energy between different regions of the country. And we managed to achieve uh, absolutely unmatched speed of restoration. For example, the auto transformer, our record was 24 days. We restored auto transformer, which can power up to 200,000 families. In Europe, they need for that like 3 to 4 months. So basically, we had deployed in-house personnel to and split them into like 70 teams, which were 24/7 without rest and without weekends. They were restoring power grid so that the speed of restoration could match the speed of destruction. And at some point of time, we managed to restore quicker than Russians were able to destroy. And this was the point somewhere in the early 2023, when it was already clear that this energy war was won by Ukraine. And last but not least, we our interconnection to Europe. We used that interconnection to stabilize our system during moments of attacks and imports of electricity and emergency injections of electricity from European to Ukrainian system during attacks saved us from much more severe consequences that otherwise would wait for us. had we not been connected to European electric system.
Of course, speed is one of the key factors, and we heard that Mr. Kudryski alluded to the speed of recovery, of restoration. But what unconventional technological solutions were instrumental for the quickest restoration of power and maintenance?
For instance, we were probably one of the first organizations in the country that started to apply Starlink technology to provide communication between dispatching locations. The standard protocol for us to organize a location for local or central dispatching points was diesel generator and Starlink, because in that way you can be sure that you will be connected to your peers in any situation, even in a situation of full national blackout. This is one example. Another example, when we had to transmit data to our European colleagues before interconnection with European power grid, uh, Europeans, because of their precautions for cybersecurity, demanded that we would organize a special dedicated data transmission channel from Ukraine to Europe. And because we had no time to create physical telecommunication channel during 3 weeks that we had in front of us, we had to organize special satellite data transmission channel, one point of which was in Ukraine, in Western Ukraine. Another point was, as far as I remember, in Poland, so that we could fulfill this requirement from European power grid operators and finally be connected in a very short time frame, like 3 weeks before 16th of March, 2022. And last but not least, we have invented internally a special device which was able to disconnect some power lines which we needed to disconnect during attacks to stabilize the power grid remotely. So not manually using local substation personnel, but remotely, and that saved us a precious time during missile attacks, during which we could stabilize the system and prepare it for the impact, so to say, prepare it for the missile strikes that took place like 20-30 minutes after we did everything necessary. So these are examples of technologies and innovations that we had to create, had to introduce very quickly to survive, basically. And time has proven that this creative approach was extremely important for the survival of electric grid.
In your introductory remarks, you came very close to answering my next question, but still, how has the approach to priorities changed? What is more important today, building protected but centralized facilities or investing in a decentralized and flexible system?
I have very clear answer to that. Um, Ukraine, but also any other country, shouldn't try to follow old patterns and try to build those huge power plants that would cover significant percentage of the country's consumption. This is extremely dangerous because such big objects are very easy and very obvious targets for any type of attacks, not only missile or Shahid attacks, but also cyber attacks. If you think about it, like when you disconnect a nuclear power plant from the grid, you create huge disturbance that could really cause a blackout of the system. On the contrary, when instead of one big power station that releases 3,000 megawatts to the power system, you have 310 megawatt facilities nicely spread all over the territory of the country. It is almost impossible to destroy such a system, such a network of small generation objects. And therefore, decentralization is a principle which we introduced into electric terminology of our country in early 2023, right after the first winter in war. And this decentralization principle means very same thing as decentralization in military world. You do not concentrate your assets in one spot. And this is true for tanks, for defense, air defense systems, for persons, for military personnel, but this is also true for energy objects. So to make system more resilient, more safe, more protected from the attacks, you do not only buy 20 Patriot systems, or you do not only try to build concrete shelters to create engineering protection. First and foremost, you decentralize it. Therefore, the future of Ukrainian power system, but I would also dare to say, power system of such country as Israel or Scandinavian countries or Baltic states, which are close to Russia, close to potential aggressor, is decentralization. We do not need to build new big power plants. These gigantic objects are dinosaurs of Soviet times, and they have to be replaced with time, not simultaneously, but with time. They have to be replaced by modern, efficient, economically efficient, but also smaller objects, and their quantity has to be sufficient to make sure that no aggressor can produce as many missiles as many power plants we have in the country.
The large-scale invasion, which Ukraine has become the target of, brought to minds of many, many people some apprehension that the entire economy system will collapse. However, the staunchness of the Ukrainian energy sector played one of the key roles in preserving the working of economy as close to normal as possible, although of course it cannot be called business as usual. Do market rules still apply? What is the role of market-based balancing mechanisms, ancillary services, imbalance penalties in extreme crisis? What needs to be changed?
Well, I would say, Andriy, that there is some, let's say, school of thought that, let's say, proclaims that during wartime we need to come back to manual management of the market processes, as it was before 2019 when we introduced electricity market model. At that time, there was certain Ivan Ivanovich or a group of Ivan Ivanoviches who could decide at which price which power station could sell its output to the market. I don't need to say that such a system was deeply corrupt, but also it was deeply inefficient. Because it didn't stimulate investment into those technologies which were needed the most. It stimulated investment into technologies which were favored by Ivan Ivanoviches. So this is absolutely incorrect and flawed approach. During wartime, much more than any other period of time, we need efficient market to make sure that investments are distributed into those or applied to those technologies which are needed the most. At the moment, we do not need, for example, low maneuvering coal-fired power plants. At the moment, we much less need base load from nuclear power plants. At the current moment, we need mostly balancing, balancing flexible capacities, and these technologies have to be rewarded by the market. It should not be a decision of some person. It should be a decision of thousands of buyers and sellers on the market. That's why I think that balancing during wartime, as it is in Ukraine now, has many flaws. But these flaws are not connected to the fact that the market is liberalized, but they are rather connected to the fact that market is to a very large extent manually operated. For example, in 2022 during winter, you remember we had severe power cuts, and you spent unfortunately 76 hours without electricity, Andriy. But do you
Yes.
know? But do you know that during that time, because of artificial price caps on Ukrainian market, we imported zero from Europe. And when I say zero, I mean literally zero. So half of the country was suffering from the power cuts, but the national regulator, Ministry of Energy, and other institutions, they kept price low, which prevented us from importing energy. And as a result, we had to spend like 20 times more or 10 times more on diesel generator instead of buying the energy from Europe. So this is an example of how we should not operate. So in my view, during the war, much more than in any other period, we need to synchronize our market rules and balancing rules with Europe, and we need to let market decide and let market, so to say, rule the roost. Another example, if you remember fuel crisis in 2022 in the summer. First of all, the state reacted by keeping price caps for the gasoline and diesel, and people could not buy this. They could not fill in tanks of their cars for few weeks. As soon as the state stopped regulating it, the businesses, they managed to bring as much fuel as was needed by the whole Ukraine, and now we've forgotten about any fuel crisis. Can you remember yourself trying to find where you could buy gasoline since 2022? No. Well,
Well,
because
no, of course, because I do not drive.
maybe your friends which are driving, they did not complain since 2022, I'm sure, because there was no situation of deficit since then. So in electric market is a little bit more complex. It takes more time for it to adapt to the new reality, but the principle is the same. The less regulation, the more synchronization with European rules, the more exchanges with Europe, the more resilient and efficient this market is, also for the customers, not only for the producers.
Well, I don't know if this is the direct consequence of what Mr. Kudryski is saying, but just a moment ago, we had another corroboration of participation in the forum on the 9th of October. And I am inclined to think that what we were hearing right now uh, made a contribution to the decision of this person. We now will have also as our participant Mr. Vesa, who is a regulator affairs director at Energy Economics Commercial. So thank you very much, not only for sharing your thoughts, but for attracting new participants in the forum as well. Meanwhile, of course, we expect that there will be more speakers on the 9th of October in Vienna, this balancing forum. But if you were now to say what is the major lesson that Europe should take from what's happened in Ukraine and around Ukraine energy-wise during these years. You have already uh, you have already touched upon this, but could you please extrapolate on this?
Well, when I was invited to speak at in the NATO headquarters a couple of years ago to tell them about about our experience of protecting against attacks on energy grid, they asked me the very same question: what are the lessons learned? And I'm always answering to this question in one way. We have few lessons. First of all, if there is a big war, it's imminent that adversary would attack your electric grid, because this is the most basic of all basic types of critical infrastructure, because this is the infrastructure without which nothing else can operate, like gas transport, internet, uh, industry, anything, communication, any everything dies when you just switch it off the grid. So basically, what the first lesson that we learned is that adversary will try to break your to make your country collapse by attacking your electric system. And the second lesson, which is a consequence from the first one, no one is prepared. Because if you analyze the protocols of European countries, the safety protocols, restoration protocols for electric objects in European countries, uh, they are not adapted to the reality, unfortunately, to the reality of Ukraine and Ukrainian Russian war. And you need to have enough people at place to restore your objects. You need to create a critical amount of spare parts and equipment to restore your objects quickly, not to wait until the spare parts and equipment will be manufactured, because it would take years. You of course need money, but you also need proper safety protocols. For example, do you know that because of chasing economic efficiency in most European countries, electric substations are unmanned, so they are not operated by any human, and in some countries they are not even they do not even have any fences or any security systems. So some Mr. Ivan Ivanovich, the tourist from Russia or from other country, can just come at this object when he or she wants, and can create some can sabotage its operation at any moment of time, and you will not be able to to prevent it. And I can tell you that uh, you can electric engineers could easily name like 10 spots in European electric grid that would make that would if they collapse simultaneously, it would make probably widespread blackout on European continent. So electric grid is extremely vulnerable, and because its vulnerability, all countries are vulnerable as well. So you need to invest into critical stock of spare parts. You need to hire people inside electric companies to make sure that in the critical moment you will have enough personnel to restore your objects. You need to protect your cybersecurity perimeter, and you also need to invest a lot of money into air defense and engineering protection. These are bad news for most of the electric operators, because their life uh, for sure will be much easier without these precautions, and also will be much cheaper. But I can assure you that facing the consequences being unprepared is much, much more expensive.
Well, I was so elated at the fact that our conversation with Mr. Kudrytsky brings immediate results in the form of new people joining our future forum on balancing energy in Vienna on the 9th of October, that I announced the title of the person who volunteered to join, but I failed to mention that this person comes from Ørsted AS, which is a Danish multinational power company recognized as a global leader in renewable energy. And of course, its vision is to create a world that runs entirely on green energy and so on and so forth. So you may see our future prospective participants that we are gaining in scope. Meanwhile, I have several other questions to Mr. Kudrytsky if you are still willing to be with us and answer them. And one of them is, of course, about human factor and crisis management. You mentioned AI in your speech, and what is in addition to technical solutions, how have you managed to maintain the motivation and operational efficiency of dispatchers, engineers who worked and still work under constant psychological pressure? What changes in personnel management protocols have proven to be the most effective? And if you don't mind, please share your own experience, how you mobilized yourself, because I know that you had to go through some very harsh times.
Yes, indeed. First of all, we were lucky that before the invasion, we managed to finalize the organizational reform in our company. And this reform, in a nutshell, was streamlining the processes and uh, making the distance between electric engineer and in the field and CEO much shorter. So when the reform started, between myself and the electric engineer at the substation were about 25 to 30 managers managing layers. When we finished, it was 12. So it was much easier for us to operate such a lean structure during crisis because you can literally call to any guy in the field and you can really translate your command quite quickly and much more efficiently, contrary to the complex hierarchical organization where it takes a lot of time just to translate some order from above to the ground. So this is organizational reform. Like it created a proper environment, operational environment, which was resilient enough to stand the crisis. Now, from the moral perspective, our people were. I did not even need to motivate them because they were so motivated themselves. Many of them were intending to go to the army, but uh, quite quickly, quite soon, we realized that service within Ukrenergo was to very large extent equivalent at the time because their mission was to save the power system and prevent it from collapse. So that mission was so important itself that 99% of the personnel they they kind of sacrifice their effort and time and sometimes their lives, unfortunately, to fulfill that mission. Uh, as a CEO, my experience was that I quite quickly realized that I have to talk to people personally. So I traveled a lot. I visited almost all our objects in every region of the country, including frontline regions, of course. And I talked to them personally and tried to cheer them up and tried to demonstrate that the leadership was absolutely keen to support the most precious people in the organization, which are people in the field, people which physically restore objects. So So we were devoting a lot of time to that communication to our personnel, to our staff. We also managed to secure financing from our Western friends and partners to renovate their special vehicles, their technical equipment to make their work easier. And also, we of course increased or introduced the special bonuses system for those restoration teams which were involved in restoration of important objects. We literally doubled, sometimes tripled their salary to not to make them earn more, but to demonstrate to them how important their work was. So it was
You
more a
mentioned,
psychological. It was
yes,
more a
yes.
psychological, trick, or not trick, but let's say element, not financial one. And we tried to do our best to keep them motivated, and they were. And I can tell you proudly that despite the fact that our substations were attacked by thousands of missiles and drones, I cannot remember a single case when our employee came to his or her manager and asked to be somehow to resign or to not to go to work because of danger.
You
Not
mentioned
any single
an
case.
average guy in the field. Does this mean that the energy sector and your company still remain a male-dominated environment? And what changes are happening here, if any?
Well, it is it has been traditionally male-dominated environment. I need to say it's a pity, um, but what I can tell you is that this situation is changing with time, changing for the better. Uh, when I came to the company in 2016, it was hard to imagine a woman in the dispatching team, for example. Uh, and also, it was hard to imagine that such a team would include some young people from the which have just graduated from the university. So there was very little fresh blood, so to say, in those technical streams. But now I think that the percentage of women is growing, like it has grown by a few times since then. And many young people are coming to work into electric sector, to Ukrenergo specifically, and they are proud to do that. So not in terms of men women ratio, but also in terms of age structure, in terms of other parameters. It's becoming more and more diversified environment, even even though this sector is indeed very inclined to be very traditional, conservative, but this is changing with time. And I think that we were quite successful in eliminating any types of discrimination or disproportions, intentional disproportions in the structure of our personnel.
Again, we came very close to the next question while you were talking about centralization and decentralization. How is the experience changing the economics of energy sustainability? What new arguments have emerged for investors and regulators to invest in redundancy, cybersecurity, and smart grids technologies that were previously considered too expensive?
Well, first of all, in general, the centralized power system, which is based on modern technologies, is not more expensive. It is cheaper than traditional system, and this is the main reason why such a system will be is the future of this format, is the future of the power system. But of course, security precautions and safety as an element uh, has become much more important since the start of full-scale invasion. And you can see it by analyzing very concrete economic parameter, which I can name to you. This is the cost of insurance. So if you wish to operate your power object without paying a fortune to insurance company, you'd better think about cybersecurity perimeter. You'd better think about safety, physical access to your object, etc., etc. So such things, they can quite dramatically decrease your insurance cost, but also for the investor, it is very important that their projects are bankable. So in the modern world, especially in Ukraine, I can tell you that no project which pays small attention to security, all types of security, no project is able to attract sufficient financing from the banks. So if you are an investor and if you consider energy as a suitable sector to invest, and it is a suitable sector to invest because it offers very nice profitability, then you are obliged to think about safety, because otherwise, due to economic reasons, you will not be able to take a loan, you will not be able to cover your object by insurance, etc., etc. So to a very large extent, and now I am in the role of investor into energy system in my new capacity, so I can tell you it's close to impossible to build a significant generation portfolio without thinking about these important matters that you mentioned.
Those who have joined for some reason to watch from this moment or a bit earlier, I remind that this conversation with Mr. Kudrytsky, who used to chair the Ukrenergo national company in Ukraine, is one of the previews that Energy Club organizes in the wake of preparation for the Energy Forum on the 9th of October in Vienna, which will be concentrated on energy balance in Europe and utilizing the Ukrainian experience in this respect. And of course, the fact that we have survived this terrible Russian onslaught for more than 3 years now, and the energy sector has proven its sustainability, is a thing that has not only to be admired, but to draw some conclusions from. However, we still don't know how long this is going to last, when the war will stop, and when the imminent danger will be removed. So, about the long-term strategy, how should the experience of recent years, to your mind, change the long-term development strategy of Ukrenergo and possibly of other European TSOs? How do you integrate so-called chaotic distributed generation into long-term grid planning?
Well, I would not call this distributed generation chaotic. It's as controllable and dispatchable as any other kinds of traditional generation. If we talk about, for example, battery storage systems or small gas piston installations, these are very stable, very organized, uh, responsive, and very flexible technologies, much more flexible and responsive than, for example, nuclear or thermal power plants. So integration of this network of small power stations into the grid of the future is quite straightforward. We already touched upon this before when we were talking about the future grid. So the future grid is decentralized, meaning that we will be having hundreds or thousands of power plants in every power system. And of course, the very important feature of such a system is that the national dispatcher, in Ukraine it's Ukrenergo, in other countries they have their own Ukrenergo, so to say. But these dispatchers, these operators of the power system, they have to be able to dispatch those hundreds and thousands of small power plants. And of course, you cannot, given this quantity, you cannot dispatch them manually. You need to dispatch them by using IT solutions, and you also um, need to dispatch them by using economic merit order to define which power plant has to be activated and when. So this brings us to the matter of digitalization of the markets, of the operation of the power system, automation of many technological processes that were in past manual. And also it brings us to a much more efficient markets, which are able to reflect even 3, 4 years
Hello?
format of markets, when all those deviations were swallowed by the fact that the price for the electricity was defined by somebody for the day or even for the longer period of time. So now the granularity of pricing is increased with development of technologies. In Ukraine, many traders are bidding automatically to the exchanges. So they have automatic systems for placing bids at the auctions of different kinds. And Ukrenergo and other world operators of power systems, they will just use modern technologies to operate modern power plants. So this process is naturally changing because of economic but also security reasons. And therefore, the smarter we will be, the more successful the better place we will have in this energy market of the future.
We have agreed to work for 60 minutes. We have exhausted our time limit, but considering the importance of the topic, may I impose on your time for another 5 minutes? All right? You mentioned international assistance. Could you be more specific about this? What international assistance in terms of technical equipment or expertise has been the most valuable and rapid? And what unexpected problems have you encountered in the supply chains of critical equipment? And what lessons can other operators learn from what you have gone through?
Well, that's a very, very good question. Um, First of all, the assistance for Ukrenergo was more than 3 billion euros overall. So after Ukrainian state, we were the second largest organization accumulating Western support during the full-scale invasion in this country. This was in different forms, mostly in the forms of grant financing and loans, which we used also to compensate for the flows of the market, for the debts on the market, which damaged the ability of generation plants to restore from after missile strikes. So imagine if somebody owns to Ukrenergo billions of dollars, we own these billions of dollars to power plants that produce energy. Of course, they lack this money to restore from Russian attacks. So we had to uh, attract financing to make sure that the generation facilities can be restored, can restore themselves, and can buy necessary fuel like gas or coal to operate, and also necessary spare parts. Another form was, of course, in-kind donations of equipment. Like the most critical one was auto transformer equipment, because this was the primary target of Russians. This is the most critical element in the transmission grid, the most critical kind of the type of the equipment. So one item could power up hundreds of thousands of families. So it's a very big, complex, expensive, and rare equipment. So the surprise for me in the supply chains was that, for example, Ukraine has around 200 auto transformers in its transmission grid. United States, they have around 10,000. But you know what? They could not find any spare auto transformer for us. And we were surprised to find out that, for example, in the United States, there is a huge supply crisis for auto transformers because they don't want to buy from China. They have trading war with or trading issues with South Korea, and the lead time for the production manufacturing of the auto transformer for United States company is like 3 to 4 years. So Ukraine was lucky to have its own auto transformer production, which covered significant part of our restoration process. But one important lesson learned from the global supply chain was that the world is dependent on Indian, Chinese, and in general Asian electric equipment, and this electric equipment is very rarely produced in Europe and United States. So globally, if you imagine some global conflict, there will be a problem with, as we know, rare earth minerals, but there will be also a problem with electric equipment because in this area, Western world is deeply dependent from the so-called global South. And of course, there were many other lessons that we learned, but I think this is worth mentioning because it's the most global and the most important one.
My last question stems from what you have said when you said that at no occasion your people had to manually switch off something in those circumstances. And it's about the so-called manually switching off market mechanisms. Have you had to ever use this, or have you instead created new temporary products for, let's say, for balanced services? And looking at the European market, which elements of them would you think, uh, which prospects are, which features are most vulnerable in a crisis like this?
Well, I would say that first of all, just a small correction. I did not mean that we did not use any manual procedures to switch off equipment at our substations. We just invented automatic ways to do that on top of the manual operation because manual operation was not always possible, not at any circumstances.
Okay.
But if we speak about markets, the vulnerability of current format of, for example, European markets is lack of interconnection. So the countries electrically are not interconnected to the extent that would be ideal. So in other words, we need to build more interconnectors, more power lines between countries. This is one. Second, the markets are not yet fully integrated. This means that if I have a balancing power plant in France, I cannot sell balancing service to the Spain. I can only render emergency assistance from operator to operator, but we still have to finalize in Europe merging of balancing markets and so-called ancillary services markets. And last but not least, in Ukraine, the grid has excessive capacity. Historically, we used to consume 300 billion kilowatt hours during Soviet times we're now consuming 100. So the grid was scaled to transmit much more energy than it does now. In Europe, it's vice versa. In Europe, you connect to the grid at a very large scale, for example, solar power plants. The grid has to be able to release the power from the solar power plant, for example, 1 megawatt. The grid that you need to reserve for the solar power plant is 1 megawatt. So you need to push through this 1 megawatt at any moment of time. But the problem is that solar panel produces solar energy only at a factor of 0.14 to its maximum capacity. So on average, this solar plant produces 0.14 megawatt instead of 1, but you already reserved 1 megawatt of the grid for that. Traditional generation produces much more compared to its installed capacity. So basically, what you're doing, you need much more grid for renewable energy than you need for traditional generation. Okay, and for that reason, Europe has Europe is not building enough grid to transition from traditional to renewable energy system with a speed at which they are transitioning now. So they're creating a scarcity of the grid. They put too much pressure on the grid, and therefore the markets sometimes are kind of not distorted, but the markets cannot heal this problem because it's a physical, real world problem. And probably I would say that it requires not a change in market regulation, but it requires a change in building regulation. For example, European Union and in the Western world in general will have to face the necessity to allow or to let's say to make procedures for allocation of the land, construction permits for energy infrastructure, to make all those permits easier, because the bureaucracy of it is killing those grid projects that have to be in place to make sure that we can deploy more wind and solar energy in the system. So this is the problem for Europe. Luckily for us, in Ukraine, this problem is much smaller. It's not that critical. But in Europe, they need to do something to make sure that they are building enough grid capacity to create a space, a living space for renewable energy.
Well, thank you very, very much, Mr. Kudrytsky. I remind our audience that this was the first preview meeting within the framework of the Energy Club in preparation to the Energy Forum in Vienna, which has to happen on the 9th of October this year. And it will be about balancing Europe's energy system, challenges, solutions, and prospects. You will be able to read more about this on the iclub.energy. This is the site of the Energy Club in Ukraine, and you will be also be able to launch an application for your participation. And as you have probably seen, or you may see if you review this conversation, even as we spoke with Mr. Kudrytsky, who is, of course, a very experienced Ukrainian energy figure. We had a welcome news that Ørsted will join us in Vienna, and this is an internationally recognized as a leader Danish multinational company which specializes in renewable energy, sources of energy. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. And if we want to get to know more about the issues that we discussed with Mr. Volodymyr Kudrytsky, welcome to Vienna. You will have an opportunity to delve into them in earnest. Take care. Bye-bye.